Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello, welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I am here with Sarah Baillie today. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I feel like I have to stop introducing you with your last name because everyone knows who Sarah is when I say Sarah. It's so funny now, Sarah, when I'm out and I meet people, or maybe I start work with a new client. There often are people who listen to this podcast, but it's like people feel like they know you and they know me. So I regularly, I'll say, I'll be referencing you as a naturopathic doctor and around some topic in midlife. If I'm making suggestions for them, I might say, well, my colleague, Sarah Baillie, says this about that or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, Sarah, I know Sarah. So anyway, we can probably drop the formalities here.
I know. I actually had people ask me, how's Wendy? It's just like they've never met you. They're like, I feel like I know you. How's Wendy?
So funny. We're doing an experiment today, guys. And the experiment is this. Sarah and I both came to this podcast recording session slightly flat today. Like we both basically, I could tell within a minute of being on the call, Sarah was feeling the same way I was feeling, which was not super energized and just kind of in a funk. And mine relates to like just this certain thing that I'm trying to organize that is not getting organized in the way that I'd hoped it was going to get organized. Anyway, it's not a big deal and I'll figure it out. And Sarah has school, the upper part of her school's been shut down for COVID. So she's
Kill me now, folks. Honestly.
Like,
I think the only school in the world right now who is shut for COVID.
Honestly. Who thought that was going to happen again?
Oh my God. Anyways, I have lots of opinions about that, which I've shared with the school, but nobody's emailed me or texted me back. So clearly they don't share my opinions. Anyways, that aside, yes, there's lots. Lots going on.
So basically the experiment is what happens when you connect with somebody you really like, when you're in a bad mood. How does it impact your energy levels and your mood? So I guess, I can say I'm already feeling better. We have been chatting for about 15 minutes before we hit record, which is probably good because you guys didn't really want to hear from us 15 minutes ago when we were both feeling really cranky. But we just thought this would be a really great live experiment to do. What happens with our mood if we chat for 15 or 20 minutes about something that we're passionate about? So today, this is a topic that Sarah proposed. We have talked a lot on this podcast about the U curve, which is the happiness curve. And Sarah's explained it a few times. And there are lots of, articles out there about this phenomenon, which is basically that our happiness sort of tracks this U. If you think of the letter U, which is, we start at the top of the first side of the U. And that is, in our 20s or whatever. And then as we go through our life, we go down into the bottom of the U. And that usually happens at around what age, Sarah? What's the age at the bottom?
46 to 48, like late 40s. All the things are kind of, it's like a collision of perimenopause, kids' needs, kids leaving home.
Sandwich, parents needing help, all of that.
Yeah, career pressures, all that sort of stuff in it.
Yeah.
Usually, statistically, women's happiness is the least in their entire lives at that time.
Yeah, 46 to 50-ish or something. So then we start to go back up the U on the other side and things start to get better. That's the good news, is that things start to get better. And I've noticed that phenomenon with the women that I work with who are kind of on the other side of 50 usually. And I've noticed it personally at 51 and a half, almost 52 now. And having been through menopause and having had my kids leave to go to university, like things are very, very different now than they were just a few years ago for me in terms of how I'm feeling generally, my life satisfaction and fulfillment. So what Sarah wanted to talk about, which I thought was a great idea, is how to get yourself out of the U curve faster. So things that we can do to accelerate that process that sort of naturally happens, but that transition out of the peak unhappiness into more life satisfaction and joy.
Also, Wendy, I just like the idea came to me when I started to see more people coming to me looking to prevent that. So they're in their early 40s and they were hearing the horror stories from friends and older people in their environment who are saying, it can be really rough. And so they're coming to me saying, I want to make it, I don't want to experience that, or I want to take the edges off of that. So how can I prevent it? So this has an aspect of prevention as well. What can you do if you're a little bit earlier in midlife and you're not in the U at this stage? Or in the bottom of the U, how can you prevent getting there?
Oh, I love that. I've never had anyone come to me and say that. In the early 40s, most women are usually already feeling like they're sort of underwater at that point. But I think that's great. I do have, though, and I think I told you this, Sarah, I have a couple of clients right now one client actually who's under 30 and another client who's in their early 30s who are recognizing that their lives aren't where they want them to be right now in terms of, so they're not working with me because they have a dependency on alcohol or there's some unhealthy coping mechanism that they're concerned about. It's not about physical wellness. They're recognizing that the patterns that they're in mentally, in terms of how they're thinking about things, are not serving them. The levels of anxiety in their life aren't serving them, and they're not as present in their lives as they would like to be, and therefore not getting as much joy as they'd like. And that's pretty cool because that's not normally the case. First of all, I generally work with women who are further along in midlife, and also just very unusual that a person at that age would have that level of insight into what they want for their lives, and then be willing to dedicate the time and the work to change it. It's really cool. Anyway,
I think things like this podcast and all the other great information out there about midlife it's seeping into earlier years, earlier generations. It's not uncommon for me to have someone in their early 40s now come in and say, like, I don't want this to be a shit show.
Yeah, great.
I actually, I know it's not going to be easy necessarily, but I want to be in the best. I often hear I want to be in the best shape physically and mentally as I go through this process. Where nobody had ever said anything. I knew only about perimenopause because I was in the industry. I would never have known that from my cohort of friends or from my family, my mother, and generations before us would never have had that information. So, and even though we talk about, there being too much information out there, and in this area, this is a good trickle down effect of all this info coming to their radars. They're like actually able to actively participate in their choices earlier so that they have less risk of burning out in those later years.
Right. So Sarah sort of had a list of things that we're going to talk about today, and a few of them, the early ones on the list, are things that we have talked about already a couple of times on the podcast, so we don't want to spend too much time on those. But those are, learning when you're earlier on in midlife, really starting to practice the cutting back on the to-do list, like just really starting to take a hard look at that. And if you're someone who is constantly busy and you're finding yourself saying, oh my gosh, I'm so busy, I never get a chance to take a break, and that's somehow become a badge of honor for you, to actually recognize that's just the beginning of burnout. That's what that is. And really working hard on doing less, which involves learning how to say no, something we've talked about many times on this podcast. So if you're listening now and you're thinking, ooh, that's me, go back and listen to some of the previous episodes where we talk about how to do less, I think actually just in the last, I would say, like in the last couple of months, we did an episode. One was like how to do less, and then the other one was on how to get more. So we did do those 2 episodes. So go back and listen to those. And then how to care less, like learning how to notice and really develop some insight around how much care and attention you're giving to things and how that's actually serving you and maybe serving those things and people that you're, pouring all this attention and care into. Is it actually serving anyone? And if not, how can you care less? And again, that's something we've talked about before. But then there was this whole other piece of this that you wanted to talk about, Sarah, and I just thought, great idea for a conversation here, because it's not something we've talked about that much. And that was this idea of a couple things. First of all, I think clawing back space for you and how to actually make that happen, how to actually create that space for you. Obviously, those first 3 things, caring less, doing less, saying no, are going to help with that. But there's more to that. And then also opening up the conversation around your own experience in midlife with the people that are all around you who you're living with, who probably have no idea what's going on. So you want to start with the conversation about like what you meant by that piece?
By having that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot on this podcast about the fact that I'll just recap about the fact that when you are entering midlife, your hormones are starting to change. They're starting to be less about nurturing everybody else and more, they're moving in that direction of nurturing yourself, going back to looking after yourself and making yourself a priority. And that's a really hard thing to even recognize when you're in the middle of it in your early life, especially if you have kids. We've talked about that before, because the drive to make sure that they are looked after is very strong, and the hormones are driving that. But as children age and as you age, the necessary change in the hormones means that your body will actually start to care less, if that makes sense. So your brain might think, I still need to nurture all these people in my life, but your body isn't providing the resources for you to do that anymore. And so there's often this conflict that feels quite agitating around, like, well, I'm supposed to do these things for them, whether they be your family or organizations that you're working for or volunteering for, committing your energy to. I'm supposed to be like this because I've done it for a long time, but internally there may be this feeling like I actually don't want to do this anymore. And this may not be serving me or serving the other people in my life anymore. This is all happening at a very subconscious level usually. And because the people that it affects, whether it be the family members only, or whether it be the people in your workplace or the places that you commit your time to, they have no idea that this is going on. You might not even have any idea that this is going on. So when you sit and listen to that voice that says, I don't feel like doing this anymore, I'm feeling resentful about having to make kids lunches, for example. Well, you go back to my lunch example of how, telling my kids recently who are 13 and 15 that I wasn't going to make their lunches and their breakfasts anymore. I was feeling so much resentment around having to do that because I didn't feel like I had the resources to do it anymore. And also I felt like at that age, they should be doing it on their own, but they didn't. I was just mad about lunches. I was just angry all the time. And they didn't understand that I was angry about their lunches. They just thought I was pissy. They just thought I was angry all the time. So when I explained to them, when I actually said to them, this is what's happening for me, I'm feeling like it's my job, first of all, to look after your ability to look after yourselves in the world. And so it's important to me that you learn how to do this, but also I'm tired of making your lunch and I'm done. I've been cooking for you for 15 years and I'm done now. And they were like, okay. They literally were like, my oldest said, I've been trying to make my lunch for 2 years. I was like, you have? But so it's often the case I find when I have this conversation with women is that they are building up feelings around the things that they're expected to do in their world. And some of them quite strong, and it comes out as irritation about other things sometimes. Yeah. And those feelings are often a representation of something that of us, like space that you could be creating in your life. But if you don't tell the people in your life this, what's happening, how you're feeling, how you might need to pull back in certain areas, how you might change what you're caring about in your life. If you don't explain that to them, they have no idea. And so they're going to continue to behave the same way all the time, expecting you to behave the same way.
Right.
And that expectation then is what drives resentment.
Right.
And so it's really helpful if you can find the words to explain to your family, age appropriately, explain what's happening in your self, and how you're feeling, and ask for their understanding around that, and perhaps even ask about how they might be able to help you find some space for themselves. It's amazing how creative people can be when they want to help you.
Yeah. And I've said this before on, I think probably on this podcast, but definitely in coaching. The thing your kids want most for you is for you to be happy. So if you actually if you assume that that's true, and then you take the time to explain to them what it is that you need, they will actually try to make that happen for you. And they're probably not going to do it perfectly, because they're still super selfish, because they're kids, and because they're not in nurturing mode, but they will try to facilitate that for you. And so I think we're just doing ourselves a disservice keeping all of this to ourselves. And in fairness, a lot of us don't have any idea what's going on for a long period of time. But once you get to that place of awareness, once you've listened to all the episodes on this podcast and you're thinking, that is me, then I do think that you owe it to yourself and to the people in your life to explain, this is how I'm feeling. And it's not personal to you, but it is personal to me. And this is where I am. And I also think, depending on the age of your kids, and definitely with your husband, you can actually talk about the shifting hormones. And this again connects back. I've been having conversations a lot lately with my clients who are in midlife around some of the expectations that are on them in all areas, from kids, but also from spouses and partners around, for example, the whole desire piece. And, if you haven't listened yet to Sarah and my interview of Dr. Lori Brado, who is a women's desire specialist, go listen to that one, because she very, very clearly articulates what is happening physiologically for women in midlife in terms of hormones and how that impacts our desire. And I think we owe it to our partners and spouses to explain that to them, and have them understand that, like, this isn't personal, it's physiological. And anyway, I like the idea of talking today about the importance of having the conversations. Once you have the awareness, now you're at that place where it's like, okay, it's not your fault that you are where you are. It's life. It's hormones. It's physiological. But now what do you do with that information? If you're not at a place where it feels your life's feeling resonant, where it feels like you're behaving in a way that doesn't serve you or doesn't feel good to you, you're angry all the time or frustrated or whatever, have that conversation, invite the other people in your life in, so that they have an understanding of what it is that's going on for you, and what it is that you need as a result of that, what you need more of.
I think I've found that there's often more challenge around having the conversations with partners, because habits get pretty ingrained in terms of roles in households and what people expect for themselves from each other within a relationship. And so it can be quite a shift for women to say, I don't want to cook anymore. I'm not interested in having intercourse right now. That may come back on the table at some point. Or actually, I just want to go and sleep in another bed for a couple of months while I get my sleep back on track. And so sometimes those conversations, or I want a vacation on my own, like sometimes those conversations can be super challenging. But if you don't start having them, and you can use the hormone, the physiology of it as your launching point, which I think is really helpful. But if you're not having those conversations, then I believe that resentment just builds. And with that resentment, it can create a very fractious daily experience in a relationship if you're not talking about the bigger things, which is, I'm moving in this direction. And you might be surprised that even though I'm using men as the example just because that's my experience, but if you are partnered with a man, they're not necessarily going through a very obvious menopause, but they have their own andropause. They have their, which is male menopause. And so they are also going through their own things, and maybe they're not sharing. And so it's an opportunity to create that dialogue, and you can use the physiology, your body, what it's doing as a launching place to open that conversation.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And I, as you know, a person who is maybe like just slightly ahead in terms of the age that I went through menopause at. And now, of course, my kids are both gone. Oh, they're back. We're going to record another podcast after this on the fullness syndrome, which will be funny because my kids are back now and it's not what I thought it was going to be. But I have gotten a lot better at having these conversations with my own partner. And it has been really interesting. And Sarah's like privy to a lot of that because we're such good friends. And we talk about all of a lot of these things, but like the conversations around what it is I need and what I want for myself in the second half of my life, and things that I never even spoke of before last year. We just never talked about it. I mean, we were saving money for retirement. We talked about it in a very general way, like we would like to travel, but that's not what I want for myself in retirement. That is not how there was never any articulation of how I want to feel or what's really important to me about how I show up for the second half of my life or for myself or all that. Those conversations have been happening in a bigger way in the last year. And as I was saying to you before we hit record, Sarah, like the thing that I asked for, that's probably the biggest thing I've ever asked for, other than leaving Calgary and quitting law and moving back to Nova Scotia 15 years ago or whatever. But my husband was actually pretty on board with that. He was excited to come to the East Coast. But this year I ended up asking for something that I didn't think I was going to ask for. It came as a surprise to me during that whole empty nesting thing that was happening around this time last year. I was feeling very worried about how I was going to deal with having no kids at home and what that was going to feel like. And then the plan had been that we would transition to living sort of in a more rural area for good. So we'd sold, our house was on the market. It had sold. We were, we have a home, a second home, a cottage that we were going to move into as our full-time place. And I started panicking. I started feeling this panic in like June of last year. And maybe even a little earlier than that, around the same time we sold the house. And I was just thinking, I'm not ready for that. I can't do that yet. That's not what I want for myself. I want to feel vital. I want to be in an area that feels vital. I want to live downtown again. I want to have that urban life that I had before I had my kids. I want to be, closer to the people that matter to me. I want to be closer to the activities that matter to me. And I asked my husband, and it started as a conversation about renting a place like just closer to his work, still kind of out in the suburbs of our city. And then I said, that's not really what I want. I want to live downtown. And then we started looking for places downtown. And thank goodness I did ask for that, because it changed the year. It's like I knew intuitively that's what I needed. And it's been amazing. And I'm so happy down here. So happy, in fact, that we've actually got this place that we bought that we're renovating downtown so that we can live here for the foreseeable future, because I don't want to live in the country yet. I'm just not mentally there. So I was tough, but it was very much me listening to that kind of inner voice that was saying, this is a mistake. You're not going to be happy. And I could see the consequences of that choice. Like I could see what that would lead to. And it would have led to a lot of resentment, because frankly, my husband would be happy to be living there, or he thought he would be happy to. I think he would be much happier there than I am. He really enjoys it. But he goes to an office with 30 people every day. He has tons of social interactions. I work from home. I sit on Zoom all day long. I don't see very many people during the daytime. And in that other house, we would have been super duper. It was very isolating out there. So that's just one little example that I could think of doing that. And I don't even think I would have had the space to hear my intuition a few years ago on that.
Yeah. So that translates into, it's like part of the asking for what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Start by explaining it. create the space by doing less, and then have the courage to ask for what you need.
Yeah, because one of the other things we were talking about is that a lot of times women will say, well, I don't know what I need. And they often have this feeling or this sort of knowledge, like something's missing. I need more of something, and I just don't know what I need. And we were talking about this earlier. It's really, really difficult to know what you need when you're still in the thing that doesn't feel good, right? Like you have to create some space, knowing that space won't be filled for a while. You have to claw back that time. You have to spend some time. And I think part of that is accepting the fact that you might be a little bit bored or feel a little bit sort of like you're drifting and you don't, have a specific purpose or direction. And that's okay. I think that's where this clarity comes from. And that's sort of what happened to me last year. Like this whole, like we sold the house, and then there was this period where we were still like in the house, but like not in the house because we knew we were, and then we ended up renting a place as a stopgap measure downtown so that I could see what it was like. And in the seeing what it was like, there was a lot of adjusting that had to happen, and not everything was like perfect, but it gave me that space to get really clear on what it was that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on a much smaller level than that, the other thing we wanted to talk about was clawing back some of that space in your daily life.
Yeah.
And looking for opportunities where you can take half an hour, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be long, just that it is protected space for you. And in order to do that, quite often we have to care less. We have to say, it doesn't matter that the groceries aren't put away. It doesn't matter that there's dog hair everywhere and I need to vacuum. It doesn't matter that I'm putting my kid in front of yet another show, right? Like it's important enough for me to take that extra half hour and just say, you can have an extra half hour of Peppa Pig, right? This is just an example I used this week, but so sometimes in order to claw back that space, you really have to adopt that caring less mentality, especially when your life is very busy. Mm-hmm. And when you do claw back that space, as you said, like you may not know what to do with it. So just trying to sort of be okay with that. Like this is just half an hour of I can do whatever I want. I often get, and the response to that I often get is, well, I want my house to be clean, so I want to spend that half an hour doing housework. I think it's important that we pull back from the instinct to do that, to get things done, because that's just more doing and less being, right? Yeah. And you can really only create that space for insight by doing more of the being.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, exactly.
And so and part of that clawing back the space is setting it up so that other people in your life who hopefully are looking out for your well-being can help you to protect that space. Mm-hmm. So if your kids are old enough, you can say, I'm taking half an hour. I'm going to do, some stretching in my bedroom or whatever it is. Please do not bother me.
Yeah.
I used to have a sign on my door that I made it like all glittery and kid friendly and whatever. And it said, Mummy's time, do not disturb unless you are bleeding profusely or something like that. Like there was just like, and it said, stop, Mummy time, do not disturb unless, you've lost a hand or something like that. Like it was something very dramatic. So like asking the people in your life to help you protect that space. If it means that you need to ask a partner or a grandparent or somebody to come and take the children out for half an hour, or if you need to just make sure that you have hopefully whoever you're living with understands the value of that and will keep the distractions from the door, if you will,
Yeah.
So that, that's kind of, you can claw back the space, but if you're not protecting it, it's very easy to slip back into not taking it.
Yeah. And I just have one little last thing that I wanted to say about this that I just thought of as you were chatting. For the people who are listening, who are working hard on reducing their reliance on an unhealthy coping mechanism, whether that's alcohol or something else, this is almost always the thing people need. So the women that I work with are almost always, at least in part, drinking because they get no time to themselves. And so drinking, for example, becomes the time to themselves, the reward, the thing that's theirs, right? And I would have said that too 6 or 7 years ago, like, this is my time, this is my space, this is my thing. And so the clawing back of the time, the asking for that, the getting people in your family to actually support you around that, making that sort of like unconditional, no, yeah, that it's there, and you can rely on it being there. So for a lot of my clients, it's that they really desperately need a transition between work and home. So if you are a working parent, for example, you're coming home and you're immediately like thrown into it. Maybe you're picking kids up at daycare and then, or at school, and you get no time to yourself. It's just, you're in it. And then, there are lots of people hanging off of you, asking you to do things. You have to make dinner, you have to do all the stuff, right? For a lot of my clients, asking their partner, whoever, if they've got somebody at home, or maybe it's bringing somebody in, having a babysitter or somebody at the end of the day to give them a half an hour, and then making sure that that's happening. They have a half an hour they can rely on, where they get to do whatever the thing is that makes them feel good. And you have to do some experimenting around this. You're not going to know it right out of the gate, as Sarah said, but it's not doing the dishes or doing the laundry or cleaning up, but getting that half an hour to yourself and knowing that you have that. And that might be just lying on your bed and reading a novel for half an hour, can make a huge difference in how desperately you want to escape at the end of the night. It's amazing how much of a difference that makes. And it really is very often most valuable at that transition time, because we need time to transition. We need it. We need, just like there needs to be like a buffer zone there. And for some of my clients, they sit in the car in the driveway for 15 minutes and listen to like the Calm app or some piano music, like something's just relaxing, close their eyes, right? So I just wanted to throw that in because I think that's part of this too. If you're someone who's struggling with, you've gotten to this place where you're coping with all of this overwhelm and stress in a way that doesn't feel good to you, this might be like serve double duty, clawing back this time. Not only is it going to help decrease the resentments and make you feel better, but it might make it easier for you to not reach for that thing tonight.
And it doesn't have to be huge. I remember a therapist suggesting to me, because I was finding that when I started riding my bike to work, that instead of walking home, which was a 25-minute walk, riding home became a 5-minute thing. So I didn't have that space. And she suggested, well, just go for a longer bike ride.
Right.
Like, actually take the time and use that 20 minutes and cycle around the city. And it was so freeing just to think of it in those terms. Like, oh, I could just take the time for me. It's just 20 minutes for me. So that was life-changing in itself, just doing that.
Yeah, totally. So the point of this podcast was to emphasize the fact that there are things that you can do to prevent yourself from getting to bottoming out in this And, we talked about the some of these things we've talked about many times before in other podcasts, caring less, doing less, learning how to say no. But we really want to focus in on this, having the conversation and how important that is, to have the conversation with the people who love you about what is going on and how you're feeling and how different this is from how you were feeling 15 years ago. And, and I had that conversation with my husband. I talked to him about the hormones, what was happening with the estrogen. It was like a light bulb went on in his head. I could see the moment. And I said that the difference is that you've always felt the way you're feeling. Like, you didn't have this major shift that I had when I went through puberty. And then, for me, I really wanted to have children. And that led to me like years of trying to have kids, lots of, how complicated that was for me. And then having these kids and then just throwing myself at this because of all the estrogen that was coursing through my body. But for him, it was kind of level, so he's been really good at taking what he needs this whole time because he wasn't propelled by estrogen like I was. And of course, his life got busy too, and requirements and responsibilities got busy. And he's, also, men are also at risk of burnout and all of that. But explaining it to him and just that simple point of like, I've been doing like this, and I'm gesturing here at this big curve in terms of my hormones, and you've just been like sort of flatlined this whole time. So there has been this huge transition or shift in me. And then this is what goes along with that. And then talking about those various things. I think that's really, really helpful. The clawing back of the time though, especially if you're not at the bottom of the U curve yet, but you can see it coming, is so critically important. And if you are in the bottom, then do it. And know that as you age and as your responsibilities probably start to lessen a little bit, that you're going to be able to take more and more time for yourself. And that's going to feel really, really good. But you have to set that precedent. You have to ask for it and take it. They're probably not going to just give it to you.
No.
That's the thing. Like, they love you, but they don't even know you need it or want it.
And they're invested in you giving all of your time to them because that's all they've known.
Right.
So they have an investment in that.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know that it's actually a better investment for them, for you to back off from whatever it is that you're doing. Right?
Exactly. So have the conversation and start working on clawing back the time. This is the nub of this episode, is that we just wanted to talk about that, because that is not something that we've talked about in great detail before on this podcast. Is there anything that we didn't cover, Sarah, that you wanted to talk about today on this episode?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay. So just a reminder for anyone who's listening to this, Sarah is now coaching. Yay, very exciting. And this is a big piece of, I think, for you, Sarah, like realizing in your naturopathic practice where you're supporting women, obviously you're supporting them holistically, but a lot of it is the physiological, biological stuff that's happening in their bodies. And what you realize is there's all this emotional stuff and this sort of mental stuff that's going on for women in terms of their wellness that coincides with midlife. And coaching is actually a really great way to support women through that. And so I just wanted to take a minute to just remind people that my lovely co-host and good buddy, Sarah, is also now a coach, which is so exciting for me, and is using that to support women in a really amazing way who are struggling with this transition through midlife. So you can get information about Sarah and her coaching practice on her website, which is what, Sarah?
Oh, the website's not totally done yet.
Okay, but it will be soon.
SarahBaillie.com.
It probably will be by the time this episode comes out, Sarah. It will be done. So
okay, it will be done.
SarahBaillie.com.
Yeah. Baillie.
And I'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.